To all of you, thank you for being here this evening, and a particular thank you to the lovely people who've agreed to talk to us this evening, to Rob, who's going to be chairing for us, and then to Joan and Pete and Helen for sharing some of their story. This series has been all about history, really, and for a lot of it that's been about the history of the area or of parts of our church life, but of course there's a real personal element to all of our histories, the story part of history, and it's always such a joy to get to hear and learn about the people who are part of our community. And so I'm really grateful to all three of you in particular for sharing your journeys of faith, doubt and the church with us tonight. This is the last in our series, but if you're missing it desperately, there's going to be a web page that goes up with recordings of all the talks that we've had. So Dave will, I'm sure, send round information about that, but you can, if you've missed any, go back and check on those. For now, I will just hand over to Rob to lead us through this evening. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Emily, very much indeed, and it's lovely to be here with these wonderful people. With Helen, with Pete and with Joan. And what we're going to do is we're sitting in the order in which we're going to make some comments. We're going to make some observations about our own learnings about faith, doubt and the church. And then I'll ask maybe a question or two for us to discuss among ourselves, and then we'll see what questions there might be from the floor. So I'm very grateful to Helen for agreeing to go first. Thank you, Helen.
I came to live in the parish over 60 years ago. Thank you. And with my family, came to worship here at Holy Trinity, with my parents continuing to do so until the end of their lives in 2006 and 2012. The foundations of my faith were laid here, with the usual expected journey of Sunday school, weekly services and confirmation, but in a church that our children today just wouldn't recognise. It was a traditional setting with 1662 liturgy, hymns set for each Sunday which never changed during the year. Roles in the church, both clerical and lay, were almost entirely for men. Women had the Mothers' Union and were allowed to clean the church and arrange flowers. Everyone knew their place, and children and young people, especially girls, were seen but not heard. It wasn't until I was 13 that for the first time I had a glimpse of some deeper meaning and purpose to what, to that point, I'd never really questioned about what all this actually meant to me. My mum was taken suddenly ill at home, just a couple of months after she'd previously been admitted to hospital with another life-threatening condition. Left alone at home with my twin sister, we thought she was going to die. I remember praying for help and asking for my mum to live, making a promise to God that I would try to be a better daughter and to do more to help her. I remember it comforted me, and she did survive, but you'd have to ask her if I did change my teenage ways. Anyway, this set me on a journey that continues today and has profound meaning for me, but I still don't understand why this is so, because this has not been the same for my twin sister. My adult faith is not one that is intellectually based, and it's not something I talk about, but rather one that lives in me, the spirit of which guides me in all that I do and continues to grow and deepen, especially when I allow myself to pay attention to this part of myself. My life has been one which has been blessed and influenced by having friendships with others of faith, and particularly with women. This follows a pattern for me that has repeated itself many times when I've perhaps needed spiritual renewal, and they have appeared. It's no coincidence that my closest childhood and college friends and Enid, Alan's first wife, were all of long-standing faith. Balhamer was one such woman for me. She was my head of halls at Goldsmiths College when I moved to London to work. I discovered after some time she'd also been training for ministry. I was inspired by the way she'd answered this call whilst juggling a job and family life. I didn't go to church in London, but Val invited me to Southwark Cathedral when she was ordained deacon, and one of the first of such women. It was a moving and joyful service filled with an unforgettable spiritual atmosphere. It renewed my interest in faith at a time when I wasn't feeling engaged. Val has remained a friend to this day. She conducted my marriage to Alan at Hertford College Chapel in 1992. And when our son Samuel died, we felt there was no one more appropriate to take the funeral service here at Holy Trinity in 1994. This was the first time a woman had taken a service here, and as it was during a vacancy, the wardens had to get special permission. For a full church of family, friends and parishioners, this was a first for many and changed many minds on the question of the ordination of women. Laura, our last vicar, came into my life at a time when I was in need of renewal. She described herself as a woman of prayer, which I responded to, knowing that I needed to understand more about the importance of prayer in my life. I'd seen for myself just how this could change and sustain lives from the examples of others, such as Sue Saville, Nell Slowcock, Diana Harrison, and yes, you, Joan. Yeah, I learned a great deal from Laura, including the need to continue to pray during difficult times, and to pray also for those that we find difficult. Laura's and then subsequently Emily's arrivals meant that I wanted to really listen and take in more of the content of sermons that had been carefully crafted and enabling me to make more sense of the readings and their context, challenging me to take away each week some lines that I could reflect on. And this was also true of your sermons, Rob. There have been difficult and sad times I've had to face in my life when I've been asked, how can you believe in a God? For me, this has not been difficult to answer. During some tough times, because of my faith, I have felt able to call on God's love to walk alongside me and help me when I or someone I love is in need, just as I did all those years ago. Many times my prayers have been answered, where I've experienced the love given to me by God, often by the help and care of strangers who have come to my aid. This was no more true when I had a very long and difficult labour to deliver our son Samuel, who died. The Aussie doctor who gave me hypnotherapy on my second night so that I could get some sleep in order to be able to help me to keep going. A midwife on a shift, helping me to manage the pain, shared with me the loss of her own beloved child from cot death. The same sister midwife who 2 years later was on duty on the ward that I was in after the safe arrival of our Lydia, and who insisted on carrying our daughter to the entrance of the hospital to send us on our way home, knowing the significance of this moment to us. More recently, the prayers that were said here in this church and by so many for my cancer diagnosis, treatment and recovery, from which I experience a new depth of appreciation and understanding of the power of prayer. I've never felt so calm as I did on the morning of my operations. And once again, I did not feel I was alone. I shared with staff that we broadcast our services on Radio Charwell and that the church was in our parish. It felt good to share the good news of God, God's love for all of us in such a setting, and it gave me strength.
I went through a, do you want me to move this around? I went through a lengthy period of doubting the truth of the Christian faith and its relevance to my life in my early and mid-20s. I grew up in the Anglican Church of Australia, the son of a priest in that church. But in the middle of graduate studies in the United States, the rug was pulled out from under my faith in ways I would never have expected. What followed was a slow realization that I had never really properly made the faith my own. I had for years regularly participated in the church's life, but I had never adequately taken possession of the language and concepts of the faith. When challenged, I found that I couldn't reason theologically to save my life. A few years earlier, my brother had rejected the faith as a whole. He'd become an atheist. During my long period of uncertainty, for some reason, I was not willing to reject what I had inherited without really trying to understand it first. Something was stopping me from rejecting this tradition without first trying to get inside it to understand how it worked. This unwillingness to jettison the faith without giving it its intellectual side a real go led me into theological study. In my experience, when it comes to the Christian faith, doubt seems to have different consequences for different people. Doubt can lead some people to leave the church altogether. Witness my brother. So here doubt is destructive, you might say, of faith. Doubt can lead people to question specific church teachings and to insist that the church should change what it teaches about certain things. Here you might think of doubt as provocative for faith. Doubt can also lead people to search for a deeper understanding of what the church actually teaches. And here I think of doubt as educational in the end for faith. For me, doubt has mainly been prompted, this third type of response. Studying theology has helped me to understand a little better how it works and how to reason. Since then, doubts about some aspect of the faith have not generally made me want to quit the church, nor have doubts turned me into a theological revisionist, someone who thinks the faith has to change to make it more modern or for it to keep up with recent developments in human knowledge. When I experience doubts, my first instinct is to wonder whether it's me who has misunderstood something, who has failed to grasp what is actually going on in some teaching or another. My first reaction to doubt is to turn attention back on my own thinking and ask, what have I not seen? What have I missed? This reaction has, I think, developed in response to me learning about the Christian faith from people who find the tradition to be filled with riches, riches whose relevance has not faded with time, riches that do not require total revision to be of value today. What the people I have learned from are so good at doing is three things: describing what was at stake in past debates about crucial issues so that you really feel the weight of the issues involved. Second, explaining how a particular position on something that was adopted by the church or by one theologian or another makes the most sense of the evidence available or best addresses all of the issues involved. And third, showing how an older position remains relevant today, either because the underlying issues are still the same, even though they may not appear so, or because an older answer still does a better job of making sense of things than more recent ones do. Rowan Williams, who I think does all of these things extremely well, speaks in one of his speeches about how Christians must continually draw new people into the church to save us from becoming a cosy, closed world of people who sing hymns at one another. In that speech, he asks, how do I find ways of making all this alive for those who haven't got the same commitment to the community as I do? Can I find some new intellectual structure, some new set of metaphors, some new vocabulary that just surprises people enough to take this seriously? For me, it's precisely his ability to do these things so well, making the faith come alive, using new metaphors and vocabulary, being surprising, that makes him so effective at conveying what the faith is all about to those outside of it. But I think it is also what makes him so helpful to me during periods of doubt. If experiences of doubt provide glimpses of what it's like to be on the outside of the faith, then being shown things from new angles, through new images, and in surprising ways, is typically enough to draw me back in, and to remind me that the faith in its centuries-old form already has the resources to handle pretty much any of the worries and concerns I might throw at it.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Pete. Now, Joe.
I feel very odd sitting down. I've never
Oh,
sat down for anything.
Would you like to stand up?
Well, not when everyone else is sitting down.
We could all stand up.
We can all stand up.
Right. So, I've been asked how my beliefs and attitudes towards the church have changed over my lifetime. The answer is dramatically, which is why I haven't worshipped in any church for the past few years. I have never doubted that there is, and always has been, a spiritual aspect in all human beings. It's something that we all share. Amazingly, we are given the free will to accept it or reject it, to ignore it or put it into words, to share with others or to go our own way. When we are young, we naturally follow those with whom we live. In my case, I was born into a family that regarded worshipping every Sunday in the Church of England as part of life. It wasn't the nearest church, as my father considered that was too high. It was so much part of my life that I didn't question any of it, and eventually ended up teaching religious education, amongst other subjects, at secondary school. That's why I need to stand up, really. It was so much part of my life that I didn't question any of it. When I married my husband Harry, his upbringing had been entirely different. No church going. But when the Second World War took him to Malta, he was impressed by the faith of the people who had to live in the sort of conditions that we hear about now in the news. He came back to England a confirmed member of the Roman Catholic Church, to the bemusement of his family. The spirit was strong in him, but not the British form of Catholic worship. When we married, I was most comfortable in the Church of England, and Harry had no particular attachment to one church then. So we took our children to the nearest church and flung ourselves into church activities. After Harry's death, I came here and followed my grown-up children into this church until COVID struck, and the beginning of my gradual path towards dementia. That meant when the church reopened, I was unable to continue all I did before, and I stopped being busy and took stock of my spiritual life. I found the form of service I had followed for so many years no longer had any meaning for me. I did not want to say every Sunday that I was unworthy and please forgive me, Lord. Also, I found I was questioning much of the creed, in particular the birth and resurrection of Jesus. The birth stories appeal to children and remind us of our childhood, but they're not part of history. We know that two stories of the birth of Jesus found in the Gospels of Luke and Matthew are totally different and reflect the author's version of what might have happened in an ideal world, with no untidy sex getting in the way. The recorded death of Jesus is horrific. Rising from the grave and disappearing into the sky can only be seen as a miracle. But surely the human world should have ended then. What could be worse than killing God by the creatures that God created? Yet the world was allowed to continue and to think up even more horrific ways of killing each other. At this point, I need to remind you that I was asked to speak of how my faith had changed. I'm not expecting anyone to agree with my words. I started by talking about the spiritual aspect of all human beings. I believe we all have the opportunity to relate to God, which we are given the choice to accept or reject. These days, I feel God is very much with me and guiding me. I've given up on regular prayers or study or sermons, but I have found I missed being part of a community that accepts that the Spirit is within us. A friend suggested that I went to the Quakers, and this I have done for the past 2 or more years. There I have found the same fellowship that I enjoyed here, but without the set words defining my faith. Instead, there is silence from the moment you enter the room, a silence which brings a deep peace and allows the Spirit to guide your thought. Occasionally, a thought is shared by giving it words, but this does not provoke discussion, and the silence returns. The end of the meeting is observed by the 2 elders appointed from that day, shaking hands, and this moment caused a general shaking of hands to those nearest you. This is followed by 10 minutes afterward, where anyone who feels they have more to say can do so. This is usually in a small group. The rest take the opportunity to move to another room for refreshment and chat, and the opportunity to get to know any strangers, as you do here. The biggest change for me is lack of leadership. Elders are appointed for 3 years. A further 3 years can be served if necessary. So in time, the leadership of faith in faith falls on all who profess to be Quakers. I shall not become a Quaker because I no longer feel I fit in any organised religious group. I've made this known, and it doesn't seem to bother the Quakers, as I'm sure it wouldn't here either. So, how has my faith changed? As I said before, dramatically. I no longer call myself a Christian because I do not believe that Jesus was God on earth. I believe the Spirit of God is always with us. I wish we could find a different name for God. It's become so debased. I try not to use he or she or speak of God's hands or God looking down on us because they're so misleading. Whatever God is, it's not a human being in a human body. I believe the Spirit of God is in all of us, but we have to find that for ourselves. Amazingly, we are not made to do anything. We are given free will.
Thank you so much to Helen and to Pete and to Joan. And I thought I'd follow up and I'd temper my comments by what others had said, and then we can go into our period of maybe having a bit of a discussion and then seeing what questions there are. And one thing to say first of all is what an appropriate set of observations towards the end of your talk, Joan, because talking about the Spirit as we approach Pentecost and the Spirit and how the Spirit is in each one of us. And it reminds us of how when we celebrate Pentecost this Sunday and when we think of the Holy Spirit, we are thinking of ways in which human beings have found an experience of God inside themselves. And of course, for the Christians at Pentecost, that was something they'd experienced through Jesus' resurrection. But it reminds us of how this is something which is available to all people, and it's something that I'm sure, as a church which has an open door and seeking to show God's love for all, we believe as a church, as a community, that God's love is something that anyone can access, and that's what we are here to celebrate and also to encourage, that idea that God's love can be experienced by anyone, actually anywhere, but of course the idea of having a church like this is it's a particular place, a special place where people can do that. For myself, I thought I'd begin by saying, just observing that everybody's faith life involves decisions. And as you'll know, some people talk about being converted to faith or being born again, and that relates to their own personal experience that's authentic to them. But one thing I think it's good to know is that all faith lives involve decisions, and actually in particular what Pete said related to that, in ways in which decisions had to be made in his 20s about how he was to approach faith in a new way because of the ways in which he'd encountered doubt. And for me, myself, that's been my story, and I'll come back to that idea of how faith involves decisions, which is another word for a kind of conversion, I'd say. It's when we see things differently and we kind of realise that actually that different way of seeing things has become real for us in a kind of special way, in a distinct way, in a way we can point at. That's something we can actually kind of grab hold of. It's a kind of decision we've made to believe a certain thing because of a certain way of understanding that we've gained. But it's not just a thought that comes and goes, it's something that we hold on to. We make a decision, and that's, I think, something that characterises all faith lives. The other thing is that I wanted in particular to note is that I think all faith journeys involve an emotional response. And certainly that's true for me. For myself, all my life really, as I've grown in faith, and I hope I will continue to grow in faith all my days, as I've done that, an emotional response has been a key part of what has helped me to stay a Christian and to stay engaged in the faith. And particularly as my understanding has developed over the last, I suppose especially say 35 years since I was in my mid-teens, that experience of emotional response has been something I've gone back to again and again, and there'll be particular things that St. Paul says or that Jesus says in one of his letters or in the Gospels that I respond to very directly. And for me, they've become things I hold on to, and that they seem to be comments from Paul or from Jesus which seem to have in them a huge amount of truth. So we will perhaps all be able to think of the Beatitudes, but it's that recognition of something truthful, something that you can hold on to, something that's not just a passing thought, as I say, but something you can take a decision about and you can decide to hold on to. That's something that I have found in my life, that emotional response. And that's something that we also experience in worship, a kind of emotional response. And that might be something we want to talk about as a group in a few moments. Now, doubt it's been something that I have experienced periodically, and I've had periods of quite severe sense of doubt, and I can point at very specific periods and specific experiences that gave me that experience of doubt. And the first biggest crisis was when I was 18. I just left school, and as with other periods of doubt, I had almost had a sense of terror, if you like, in fact, in the face of the loss of a faith that meant a great deal to me. I'd grown up, as my father was a parish priest, is retired now, but I'd grown up in a vicarage, I'd grown up going to church all my childhood, we all did. My faith had become something very important to me through those decisions and those emotional responses I've already spoken about. But then when you encounter doubt, it's as if, to use a cliche, the rug's been pulled from under you, and that really is how it has felt for me. It's as if I've lost all my kind of bearings, and indeed a sense of where meaning is in the world, and how life is to have meaning, if I've lost that sense of God being a possibility, actually, at times. So I have experienced quite profound doubt, then when I was 18, and then 2 or 3 times that have been particularly important since. But what I've been able to do, and I'm very grateful about this, is that I've been able to turn to people who have helped me and pointed out books I might read. That particularly happened when I was 18. Or later on, I've come across books that have really helped me to gain new understanding. For me, actually, my faith journey has been quite lonely, actually, in a way. It's not been lonely in the sense that I've been in communities and I've been part of churches all my life and never stopped being part of a worshiping community. But I have found it lonely in the sense it's often been about reading for myself and trying to gain understanding for myself. So although, first of all, when I experienced doubt, I was pointed to books I might read, and I knew then that I learnt things that I just didn't know before and that really helped me to understand in a new way. Later on, I came across books that really gave me a new understanding. And we all know the story of St. Paul on the road of Damascus to Damascus and how the scales fall from his eyes. And I can think of very specific times when I read something and I came to a new understanding, and it really was as if scales fell from my eyes. And I saw clearly why we believe something that we do, or what something means for the Christian faith, that I just was blind to before. And then once you've had that kind of experience, and it's something that perhaps we've all had in our own way, it's something you don't forget. And then it's something you carry with you. So there's an emotional response there, recognizing something that you've seen for the first time and being glad to learn it. There's a kind of decision, because you're holding on to it. It's not a passing thought, it's something you're going to keep hold of. And then you take it with you. So the doubt and then the reading and then coming to new understandings, that's been very important to me. And there have been particular authors and particular traditions that have really stimulated my faith, and I found very, very helpful. And so they've been a route to kind of revelation for me through understanding a new way of seeing things for me, but actually it turns out it's a way that probably I should have known. If I'd studied theology, if I knew more, probably I should have known it anyway. But because it's been a bit of a lonely journey in some ways, I didn't. And so when you come across that idea that really makes sense and suddenly puts things together in a way that you just couldn't see the pattern before, it's such a lovely thing. And I think, obviously, I hope that's something that we've all had in our own way. Now, I said decisions. I've mentioned decisions a few times. I wanted to say something about decision time. So there was a point where I got to a stage where I thought, I was going through another sort of period of sort of, is it true? And what if it's not true? And nothing means anything. And I thought to myself, this is absolutely ridiculous. I said to myself, you've got to make a decision. You can't spend your whole life just sort of responding kind of emotionally, frankly, to something that encourages you and then getting all fearful about something that unsettles you. And so I really made quite a conscious effort to think, well, what do I really believe? What are the facts that I think I can really hold on to, that I've learnt, that are treasured by the Christian faith? And through doing that, I came to a stage of thinking, well, no, you've got to kind of make a decision. And I made a decision that, no, I was going to, continue systematically with my reading, with that track of trying to understand as well as I could, but also that it was going to be something which I would do from a perspective of faith. And I would say, I think, that prayer life is something which I'm sure was very important in that, and that's something else we might also want to talk about, that kind of the role of practice and prayer as part of our practice of faith. That was very important because it meant that all my reading was embedded somehow in reflection time. The final thing I wanted to say was that the biggest decision I've ever made is to get ordained. And I wanted to say something a little bit about that because it actually highlights, it actually summarises in some ways what I've been trying to say with my other comments, but it also relates, I think, to the very important theme of vocation, which I believe we all have. We all have our own particular ways of being the people we are and being called into the faiths that we have. For me, my sense of vocation came very unexpectedly. I'd thought of being ordained from time to time, but I decided it clearly wasn't the right thing for me. And then very unexpectedly, there were things going on in my family, and as a result, to do with a member of it was ill, and as a result, I kind of was in a kind of almost subconscious crisis. Wasn't really aware that it was a big problem, so things going on in my mind, but we were on a very happy holiday, and I came back from the holiday. We were all there as a family. I came back from the holiday convinced I had to explore ordination, and so I did. Went through training, of course, and was ordained. And I would say it's the best thing I've ever done. It's a decision I made which is to do with an emotional response, again. It's to do with not allowing thoughts that come and go just, but to try and hold on to those thoughts, that kind of decision-making, and in this case, that decision-making to explore ordained ministry and then to take it on. The week before I was ordained deacon, I went to the ordination of a friend of mine who was being made a priest in Cowley St John Church. And the preacher at that sermon who's now a bishop in America, said that that it's often said, he said, that people who get ordained for one of two reasons. They all either get ordained to save others or to save themselves. Now, I don't think I'd say I got ordained to save others. I mean, that's not quite aligned with my tradition of Christianity, I'd say. Or not quite explicitly in that sense, although of course we all hope in sharing our faith to help others to their own faiths. And I wouldn't say I got ordained to save myself either, although that's why he said he got ordained. But I would say that it's become the way in which I can be a Christian. And I think that's one of the ways to understand what ordination is. It's just the way in which certain people find themselves needing to be Christians. So it's just part of their ordinary faith journey, like anyone else's ordinary faith journey, that's how it turns out they need to be. In the same way that other people find that their faith journey leads to them needing to be church wardens or church treasurers or other roles they might take on in church, which are the expression for them of the faith life that they have. And so for me, ordination, as I say, has been about an emotional response, about trying to bring everything together. It's clearly a decision, but it's also something you take forward as a way of life, a praxis, a way of kind of regularly, kind of methodically, in a disciplined way, living a certain kind of life, and that fueling your sense of faith. And as I say, we might well want to come back to that in comments that we share together now, as we have a bit of a chat before we open the floor. So, on that point, I thought I might just ask whether there were two particular things I thought we might sort of briefly talk about. And one of the things I thought was to come a little bit more, because all of us, I think, talked about how experience was important. Experience of worship, but also experience maybe of finding worship difficult. And I wondered if you wanted to, I wonder if we could say a little bit about maybe the importance of experience together in a community for our faith journey. And Joan, that might well relate to your ongoing experience as part of albeit maybe a sort of a permanently visiting member, but as part of a Quaker community. I mean, I don't know whether there were comments, anybody wants to say anything about the role of that sort of immersion in a community as being, and that might not be a community necessarily just now, but also a community through time, the ways in which faith has developed, which also relates to your comments on the creed, and also maybe things others might want to say about that. I don't know whether any...
I can
please,
just a couple of things I'd say. You brought up the pandemic earlier, Rob. I found the pandemic a particularly difficult time to be a Christian, because I think so much of my experience of being a member of the Christian community is strengthened by being part of a church community. And so worshipping online was just disastrous, because I think that emotional, that affective response that is so important, I find, for my faith life was almost completely absent. So I'd say that you're absolutely right. I think but then there are certain styles of being in a community as Christians, certain worship styles that I find quite off-putting. So I suppose each of us is going to have our own, using the high-low spectrum, place that we fit ourselves in. I mean, I went to divinity school in the United States, in the South, at Duke University, amongst a whole bunch of United Methodists who had grown up in evangelical Christianity in the United States, and that was completely foreign to me. And I spent my 3 years there trying to understand the language of the faith that they were using. It was so unlike what I'd grown up in. But also their worship was just completely different. And so that was, it simultaneously was off-putting, but it also expanded my recognition of what counts as Christian in a way too, that was really valuable for me. I suddenly recognized that there are so many different responses that people have to God, and the ways that they're going to express it won't necessarily fit us all perfectly. But we then, I think, have reason to look around and see if there are ways of manifestations of it that better fit us. So I'd say that's absolutely crucial. The other thing I'd say is the experience of trying to be a Christian in a family is really difficult too, especially when you've got members of your family who might be going on a different path. That's a different kind of community that you're living in right up close. And I found my dad died when I was 18. My brother became an atheist not too long after that. My early 20s crisis, a few years after he died, all of that was bound up together, and it was incredibly difficult to try to navigate that when the people I loved were that context was changing dramatically. So many different contexts, I think, can shape our faith response in really instructive ways.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because, you know, I was in a family with 4 daughters, and we're split right down the middle. So 2 would have described themselves as atheists completely and totally, and the other, myself and my older sister, have kept some faith life going. And I find it really interesting. But for me, that wasn't an actual difficult dilemma, because in my 2 sisters, who are absolutely were confirmed atheists, I saw in them the gifts, the foundations that we've all learnt in our Christian life. They share that with the communities, with the children they work with, the most needy in our communities, and that lasted to the end of my sister Liz's life. And in fact, I had one of my last conversations I had with her was, where would you like your ashes? Because she and I asked her if she wanted them to be with Samuel. Now, this church had very difficult, challenging memories for her that I'd seemed to have cast aside, but she didn't. And I'll never forget her face of absolute joy, the thought that she was going to be in this churchyard. And I never imagined, it was a very difficult conversation, because I thought she would say, well, I loved Samuel, but absolutely, this whole place, but it was an absolute gift that she gave me, that she said, yeah, just said, yes, please, yes. And we did that with Laura, and that was incredibly helpful in my journey for grief, but also somehow I never felt away from her. In fact, she was at the baptism of Samuel in our hospital room, which is unusual to have a baptism for a stillborn child. It certainly was in the 90s. And I remember her saying that was the most spiritual moment she'd ever had, and she accepted that. And I think it's interesting. That taught me that actually you can find faith in those who say, I have no faith. I think that's an early, and I see that in my twin sister. I think it makes no difference to me whether someone has no faith or they declare a faith, because I've experienced, I see that, I look for that in all people, and I think that's been an important lesson. And I can't really explain that, how one family can be, you know,
so divided.
Yeah, and I think I would say that your daughters might, as you say, that everybody goes on their own journey. Yeah. It's very difficult in the family, but it can be.
Looks at unexpected ways.
Yeah. I mean, Joan, your family must have been alongside you at this time.
Yeah, well, yeah, he still speak to me. Yeah. No, that's one of the saddest things, actually, that you know, I'm no longer worshipping with them. But yes, I don't know. I can't really tell you. All my grandchildren have left the church, but they came as children. I don't know that they've made a decision as such, but they don't have anything to do. And it's nothing to do with me. That I didn't cause that. No, but.
And can I ask, Joan, I mean, because you are now in a sense, you are a part of a new religious community, in the sense that you're attending the Quaker meetings, and obviously you were very much part of this religious community. So, and I just wondered, obviously they're different religious communities and they're appropriate. The Quaker community is appropriate now. This community was appropriate then, and you were hugely valued in your ministry here. I just wonder whether have you found sort of similar personal sort of forms of support in being in a community, even though, you know, the reason why you find those particular communities valuable. Have you found that being in a religious community helpful in your own kind of personal journey, you know, with your abiding sense of God's presence?
Yes, I see what you mean. I can't answer that properly. The thing about being a Quaker and going to, I'm not a Quaker, sorry, being with the Quakers and going into Oxford, which is where I go, there is a group that meets in Headington, and there's quite a small group. In Oxford there's a lot, and we get people who've dropped in. You get, saying we, sorry, and that is fascinating. That's why I don't stay for afterward. I go and chat with them, and we talk about God. We talk about our beliefs, sometimes with, sorry, you see, if I don't write it down, I lose the words. But yeah, sometimes with those who come from the universities, come to examine, see what it's like, and they're fascinating to talk to. Sometimes older ones who are so engrossed in being Quakers they can't see anything else, and that's interesting too, because we can be like that, can't we? We haven't looked beyond what else is there. Yeah, it is. It's just whoever you chat to. You don't. It's a big room there. I don't know whether you. Probably some of you have been down, haven't you, to see where the Quakers meet, because it's used for all sorts of things, and they've got a big room where there's a kitchen and where you have your coffee and things, and then there's a garden you walk through, and then the meeting house is at the end of it, so the meeting house can be silent and out of the way. But in this room, if you sit on your own, someone always comes and starts to talk to you. And because of my affliction, I don't remember any names at all, so I can't name anybody, I'm afraid, but they're very, it's not that you're on your own, it's that they want to talk about it. And I don't remember that in Church of England places or any other churches I've been to, even the Methodist ones, but sorry, should have said even. I didn't mean even. Sorry.
And the other thing I thought we might just briefly comment on is, this was provoked by some of the things that were said. I was just thinking about the role of mystery, and the extent to which, for you, for each of us, living faith lives or living lives engaging with matters of faith or engaging with God's presence with us is a matter of living with mystery or engaging with mystery. I mean, there's two slightly different things, because I suppose by living with mystery I mean kind of being willing to live with an element of, well, uncertainty, an element of the mysterious, not being able to really pin things down. And engagement with mystery, well, that's got something also to do with the value of worship. Helen spoke beautifully of how lovely the ordination service of your friend was, and that's one of the experiences in which we do probably experience a kind of mystery as to how it is that this means so much to us when we are worshipping together at a service like that. So I just wondered, about the role of mystery, because I don't think none of us sort of talked about it very explicitly, but it was there somehow in the background, I think, for each of us somehow.
Who wants to take that?
Who wants to do that?
Well, I can just say that the mystery for me is that God is with me. Or I can, in silly little things, when things are going wrong, I've upset both my daughters by saying God sent them, actually. But at times, I've had awful trouble trying to type out what I was writing, because I've forgotten how to use the things that are there. And I haven't liked to call upon them, because they're busy people. And they've just turned up at the right moment. And, God sent them. So there's my mystery.
I guess, when I think of what theological study is, it's not so much unravelling a mystery as it's batting away less good ideas about preserving something really important and true. But what it is that's being preserved there is fundamentally unknowable. Christians have always said God is in some fundamental sense unknowable, despite what we can know of God through Jesus. So I suppose, I think I see the study aspect as getting rid of all of the bad thinking that preserves the mystery that is at the heart of the faith in the best possible ways, without... it's not like a scientific problem we're trying to find an answer to, and we understand cause and effect and suddenly we've got it. There will always be this, unfathomable love that is inexplicably wonderful at the heart of all things that we'll never fully grasp. And so I suppose I can't just have the mystery though, I need to have the thinking about it and the best ways of trying to understand it, mostly though so I don't get trapped in problematic ways of thinking or that make it harder to accept that. So there's a dialectical or, there's a complicated relationship there between study and what it is, the object of study.
Absolutely. And actually, the thing I think I might say just in response to that, maybe we can then after this move to questions from the floor, is one of the things that's really encouraging in faith is, and you spoke about Rowan Williams as an example of somebody who writes beautifully and helps us understand better. Mm-hmm. What's incredibly encouraging is when you encounter people like Rowan Williams or other great theologians such as him, who at times will say, I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't know. There is a mystery here. Yeah. Evil, actually, when you read a theologian who says, look, basically, the problem of evil, it's a mystery, right? It is a mystery how God will allow awful things to happen to good people, to put it simply. It is a mystery. There aren't, and those who try and pretend there are cut and dried, sort of straightforward explanations, it's actually very liberating to read somebody who says, it doesn't work, basically. And there's something very encouraging about the willingness of people of great Christian, great Christian thinkers, great Christian apologists, who will sometimes say, and they all will, I think, at times, I'm not sure. Yeah. I don't know. And it encourages us all to realise that we all have the ability to try and make sense of things, but we also, all of us, even the greatest mind, and most steeped in Christian wisdom, comes up against things they do not understand. Absolutely.
Before you went to say on, I just wanted to respond, Rob, because I think you're absolutely right about that, and that goes back to your emphasis earlier on decisions, that I think in the midst of an acknowledgement of mystery, you nevertheless make a decision to keep on going, to treat this all as true and as the bedrock of your life, that you're never going to resolve that. But what's fascinating then is how some people find that they can't any longer continue to act as though it's true. And it sounds like for Joan, you've had a very different, you've gotten to a point in your life where you can't quite proceed on the assumption that it's all as it, you've received it. But I think that's the commitment I've made as a person of faith, is despite not knowing how it all works, I'm going to keep on going as though as though what lies at the heart of it is worth persisting with throughout my life.
And Joan, and you've said yourself, you have got a mystery that you are still bound up with, which is how God is with you.
Yes, yes. I think God's laughing at me, actually.
Oh, sure. Only in a kind way. Helen, did you want to...
No.
Let's see if there are any questions from the floor.
Yeah, I think if we sort of do about 7 or 8 minutes of questions so that we're drawing to a close at 8 o'clock, and then I'm sure you'll be able to accost individuals on their way out if you have more burning questions. But anyone who'd like to start us off?
Stunned to silence.
Yeah.
This is really to those of you, because Pete mentioned about being... Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Pete mentioned about being through theological training, and you have as well. And in most courses, you go in and there's a sort of body of knowledge, and at the end you do an exam and you say you've passed. What happens in theological college?
Well, I mean, I'll have a go. I mean, so, well, I mean, theological study is not the same thing as an assessment of your spiritual life or status. I think it's a very important thing to say. So there are bodies of knowledge in, Christian thinking. So there'd be, church history, one area of study, Old Testament or Hebrew Bible, New Testament, Christian theology, ministry, and sort of the practical side of things. There are centuries of tradition of inculcating knowledge and wisdom in each of those, and the practices of the faith that the church has developed over the years and just continue today. And you take, depending on the institution, you take exams at the end of it after long periods of reading, or practical work. So I mean, it looks much like what goes on in other, domains. It's just its subject matter is divided up into those sort of areas that I just referred to. So it doesn't look very different, I think, from the rest. And you can be an excellent theologian and a terrible Christian, I think. Or in terms of, you can study really well, and have a terrible faith life, or no faith life, or really. So that's why there's no necessary connection between the two.
No.
I don't know, does that help at all?
Well, and the thing to add is that, and this actually takes us back to Roy Williams again, because I think he said something like, one of the points of theological colleges is that it's so you can look back over 30 years and still wake up in a cold sweat about something you said to somebody back then. That it's actually that there are also places full of people learning to get along, people who have different faith journeys, have very often quite different faith traditions, and actually coming to greater respect of one another and greater understanding of each other. And that's one thing I certainly found. Yeah. And it was lovely to be, when I was training on the Oxford Ministry course, to be on a course which was very mixed, and we had some very kind of Anglo-Catholic people and some very liberal people and some very conservative people and some very evangelical people. And it was lovely to do things together where one would say to the other, oh, we call that something different, but I can see it's basically the same, right? And so that's great, a school for kind of human beings to understand each other a bit better within a framework of trying to learn together how to be Christian ministers.
Yeah, I completely agree. That was my experience, and then I think it promotes ecumenism, you might say. And so Rob had that experience in theological college in the US. Then I had Eastern Orthodox people, we had Catholics, we had some fundamentalists. We had a very broad tent of people who came to divinity school to study because they were either personally interested or in their own ministry training programs, and those programs thought that somewhere like Duke as an ecumenical place was worth going to. So you're absolutely right. That's what I referred to earlier, is feeling like my appreciation of the breadth of the body of Christ grew dramatically through that process.
And they become friends and they remain friends. So I will still see some of these people. So I go to Chrism Mass in Holy Week, and you'll encounter them, and I love seeing them. There are people who I just love seeing at that service because I just enjoyed learning with them.
I just wanted to raise, possibly you can throw some light on this, but all right, there's prayer, and we're encouraged to ask for things, and thinking specifically about items for which we pray a lot, and yet there is no response. I'm thinking particularly of peace. We have in the prayer book, give peace in our time, O Lord. Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be the children of God, called children, and so on. And yet, we request peace, and you can only think that this must be one of the most positive things that you could ask for, and yet we don't seem to have peace in our time at all.
Well, I can begin to give a bit of an answer, and all I'd say is that for me, prayer is, well, when we're asking for things, it's and we ask sincerely for things of God, then it's us engaging as profoundly and honestly as we can with what we really want, the deepest things that we want. And praying for peace is a good thing because it is a good thing to yearn for. And I hope it doesn't sound too simple to say that if I pray for peace and I really want peace, it will help me to, in the little way that I can, in the little bit of the world I live in, maybe live a slightly more peaceful life. I can't influence how Vladimir Putin operates or anyone else, but I can want the people who are working for peace to do well at that. And if I pray for peace, it may help my bit of the world, and if more people pray for peace, that may help the world itself to be a more peaceful place. It's not a mechanical process, it's a process of expressing a love for what we want, love for people who we care about, and love for the things we really want to see. And peace is one of those things that we really want to see. That is, I suppose, is what I would say. When I was a curate, somebody and again, I hope this doesn't sound trite, but when I was a curate, somebody in a sort of discussion group, we were talking about what's peace, what's prayer for, and the question, somebody was asking, well, what's the point of praying for something when you might not get it? And so one of a parishioner said, and I thought it was a wonderful answer. She said, well, it can't hurt, can it? And for me, that's quite a profound insight. It can't hurt, and it might help. And if it's what you really want, it's a way for you to express yourself to God, in God. So that's all I can say. I don't know whether that's helpful at all. I don't know whether that's helpful, Nick. Sorry. You always ask such good questions. As does Chris, as does everybody. But
any other questions from the floor? Well, it's been a very personal subject, and perhaps it lends itself to more personal conversations as time goes on, so I shan't make you sit here until you come up with a question. But as we perhaps then draw this formal part of the evening to a close, I do just want to say some thank yous, if that's all right. So firstly, I want to say a particular thank you to Dave, who has turned up to all of the talks in the series and provided our technological assistance and moved chairs and made magic happen. So thank you so much, Dave, for your contribution. And then to all of you who've been brave enough to be vulnerable tonight, I wanted to say to each of you, so thank you, Helen, for tonight and for your work as parish administrator, but also for your place within this community and the prayer and support that you engage in mutually, I know, with all of the people who are part of this community here. Thank you for that role that you have here at Holy Trinity. And thank you, Pete, for not only tonight, but also for the work you do exploring the Christian faith and sharing it with others and exploring that mystery and finding ways through it. That's such a valuable thing that you offer to the church. And thank you, Joan, again, not only for tonight, but for all of the incredible service that you've given to this church over the years, and for your bravery in breaking out of that mould and finding and seeking God and where you connect with God in an absolutely authentic way, and for the example that you offer to all of us to seek that authentic relationship with God. And thank you, Rob, for your time tonight and for your ministry in this place and for all you do to weave together our stories and guide us in finding meaning and guide us in exploring some of these really deep questions that may have mystery at their heart, but a mystery into which we enter more deeply. So thank you to all of our panel, and let's give them one final round of applause.